Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you can have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that, one insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company. Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you can have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that, one insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company. Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you can have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that, one insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company. Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you can have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that, one insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company.
Hi there, Duke fans. Latest episode here of the DBR, the Duke Basketball Roundup. I'm Jason Evans. It is part 2 time. Time for us to look at the big men as we continue to project the roles, the responsibilities, all that other kind of stuff for the upcoming Blue Devils of the 2024 to 2025 season. Joining me as they did on our previous episode where we talked about the guards and the wings are Donald Wine and Scott Rich. Donald, how are you doing today?
It's been a busy Wednesday, but it's been good. And the only thing that's messing me up is the fact that my finger looks like someone stomped on it from a cartoon. So it looks like has like the big bump and it's flattened, but we'll get past it.
What, my friend, what caused that to happen?
That's a great question. I don't know. But one
Those
day
are always the worst injuries.
Yeah.
So what the heck
you're
happened?
Just like,
once?
oh, I must have done it playing softball. It's like, no, I had a whole weekend where this didn't happen. Then yesterday it showed up and it looked like Looney Tunes. But we'll get through it.
So my friend Scott, before you go, I will just comment on this and say, Donald, you are still in your 40s. I am in my 50s, my late 50s, if I must be honest. And I will tell you that one of the things that starts to happen to you as you age is that mysterious injuries. You'll just wake up one morning, you'll be like, "Oh, I'm hurt. I don't know why."
Oh, that is not restrictive to your 40s or your 50s. I've been having those since I was like 26, where you kind of wake up, you're like, "Yo, my foot is the size of a balloon. Why?" And then you kind of have to think back, and you're like, "Oh yeah, that one thing maybe happened where I might have stepped off a curve." Nope, nothing happened. It just did that.
I'm telling you, when you get to your 50s, there's no like, "Oh, what was the one thing?" It's just like last night while sleeping, my body decided to injure this part of me.
Yep.
Scott Rich. Scott, welcome.
I currently do not have any injuries to report.
Not yet.
My injury. Yes, that's true. My injury report is clean. There's nothing for the Duke injury staff to hide on my end.
I will say, on a scouting or like a injury report, I will be still listed as probable. It wouldn't be questionable or doubtful.
I like it.
I'd be probable to play. Put me on, coach. I'm ready.
There we go. Frankly, for our purposes, what matters is how's your voice holding up. That's the only injury.
Voice
that
sounds
really
great.
matters
Yeah.
Here. My podcasting thumb is fine, so to speak.
Yep,
right?
Exactly.
All right, guys. By the way, folks, so you understand what we're going to be doing. We're going to be talking, as we said, we'll talk about the bigs. There is other news that we want to talk about. And in the back half of this podcast, we will get to a very important development involving the ACC, the Big 12, and the future of college sports in terms of players getting paid and players getting a piece of television revenue, all the revenue that comes into these programs. We'll get to that in a little bit, but we're going to start continuing the conversation, the long conversation. Boy, I looked at that episode the other day and I was like, oh my God, we went like an hour and 15 minutes. The conversation here is about the big men, and it should come as no surprise that we will begin our assessment, our projection of the roles with none other than Cooper Flagg. And Donald, seeing as you're playing hurt, I'll let you go first. Now, we're not looking for, don't break down his game or anything like that. We're looking for a discussion of what kind of role do you think Cooper Flagg plays for the Duke Blue Devils next season? Take it away, my friend.
I think the question when it comes to Cooper Flagg is what role will the team play for Cooper Flagg? Because this is going to be Cooper Flagg's team next year. It is going to be an offense that is built around him, a roster that has been built around him to kind of accentuate all of his talents. And we're not going to discuss all of his talents on this podcast because that could be a 3-part miniseries on all the things that he does well on the basketball floor on offense and defense. I think when we talk about just like roles, he's going to, get starters minutes. He's going to be, again, a guy who was one of the focal points of the offense. We're going to see him on the floor quite a bit doing a lot of things, not just inside, but outside on offense. And on defense, the man is an otherworldly talent inside the paint at locking down defenders, rim protection, getting steals. He's really a guy who can do it all. And it's hard to not go off on a lot of tangents about Cooper Flagg and what he could bring to the table. So what I will stick with in the interest of time is Cooper Flagg is going to be that dude, period. He is going to be that dude. And I am looking forward to seeing how he works with his teammates, how he compliments his teammates, and how his teammates compliment him. I think that's the real question here. We didn't spend a lot of time talking about how Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster are going to work together, even though we know that they will have to. But we're going to have to figure out how all these different pieces on the floor work with Cooper Flagg and vice versa. Who's going to be giving the ball? Is he going to bring the ball up at some points, which he's capable of doing? Is he going to step out and kind of draw out guys, take the 3? Will he play the 3 or the 4 predominantly? I think that's the major question that I think entering the summer we have. I think as of right now, I would say that he's going to play more of the 3. And I say that because I think that we will have a lot of switching around, but I think when we have the first lineup of the season, as of right now, that he would line up at the 3 and then have maybe a couple of bigs in there. And then, of course, he could, in this positionless game that we kind of have, he'll switch a little bit to what would be a traditional 4 and play a little bit bigger inside the paint. But I think he's going to start by trying to draw guys outside and giving them some time to operate in space, because I think he can not only operate within space, but he can create his own space. So I will leave it there because I know you guys have a lot to say about Cooper Flagg, but he's the dude.
Yeah. So a couple things I want to comment on, then I'll toss it over to Scott. And the first one is this: you mentioned his defense on the inside and his ability to block shots. I want to point out that the thing to me that was most revelatory about Cooper Flagg as I watched him play in the high school national championship and in all these all-star games, which means I was watching him against the best other players in high school, is that he is so disruptive defensively when he's not on the inside, when he's not right there up against the basket, blocking shots the way we know he can, with a shot blocking ability that perhaps hasn't been seen since Anthony Davis was in the college game. His ability to get into the passing lanes, to tip balls away, to create steals, to create deflections, to just be a pest no matter where he is on the floor. I think that's a lot of what I've seen defensively that makes him so otherworldly. And that's what I think he's going to do for Duke. And it sort of leads me to the big question about Cooper Flagg, which is, Donald, you alluded to this. Is he a 3 or is he a 4? And I have to wonder. Look, I know his mother has like tweeted or whatever and said he's a 3. And I know in the NBA they're looking at this guy and they're saying this guy is a future small forward. He's a wing. But I really think he's going to spend a lot of time at Duke at the 4. And I think the reason for that is if you look at this roster and you look at what Jon Scheyer chose to bring in the portal, Jon Scheyer brought in other wings. He brought in Mason Gillis. He brought in Sion James. Both of those are guys who are going to play on the wing for the most part. They are not guys who look, I know that Mason Gillis, can guard just about anybody on the floor. Frankly, so can Sion James, but Mason Gillis absolutely can play power forward and guard. He's 6'6". He could guard a guy who's 6'8", no problem at all in the post. But I think it's telling that when Jon Scheyer was, taking his pick among different positions out there, yeah, he brought in Malik Brown. But I think he brought in Malik Brown to be a 4 or a 5. And and the fact that he didn't grab another 4-5 kind of guy says to me that he plans on having Cooper Flagg perhaps a little bit more at the 4 than some people are projecting. Scott, what's your take on this?
I disagree with you a little bit on that analysis. And I think it's less about Cooper and the wings we brought in and more about the situation surrounding Malik Brown and how he came in, particularly what his coming in seemed to trigger with other Duke transfers out, namely with Sean Stewart. I'll wait to go into that, when we talk about Malik. My thing with Cooper is he's such a unique prospect in the sense that for years, and people have been talking about him for years, they have been saying he is the prospect whose defense is ahead of his offense. And I can't remember the last top 5 or so prospect that can garner top 5 prospect level, hype while being a primarily defensive guy.
Dude, Derek
and that's
Lively.
Scary.
Wait, Derek Lively.
So you stole my Reed Shepherd thunder last time. I was just about to go to that, sir.
I'm sorry.
I'm going to feel like I'm not a very welcome guest.
The question.
But I think that, so to go to that point, it wouldn't surprise me if for a decent portion of this season, Cooper Flagg's impact on this team is more Derek Lively than Zion Williamson. It wouldn't surprise me if he's a guy who's not scoring 20, 25 points a game. Maybe he's averaging around 10 or so points a game, but he's generating offense through his assists, through his ability to generate second chances, and he is being so impactful defensively that he wins games. Derek Lively, I think, will forever be remembered for basically winning us the home game against UNC, despite only scoring 4 points in the entire game. That's how impactful he was.
He had 9 block shots, 12, something
8.
outrageous. Yeah.
Bazonkers numbers. Yeah. And I think, again, Cooper Flagg is, I don't want to, undermine this. Cooper Flagg is a better player, a better prospect than Derek Lively. He's a very different prospect because he's not a center. But it wouldn't surprise me if, at least in the early stages, that's what his impact trends like, where we're thinking, yeah, Cooper Flagg only had 10 points. Maybe he shot 1 of 3 or 1 of 4 from deep. But my God, he made, 3 or 4 plays on defense that just turned the game that no one else could make. I think that's, and I say that to sort of temper expectations a little bit, because we see number 1 recruit, number 1 overall draft pick, and we expect a guy to score 25 points a game. And that's just not Cooper Flagg's game. And I don't think that is what he'll do at Duke, even though he probably could if he wanted to. By all accounts, he's a team first guy. By all accounts, he's a defense first guy. And we do have the scorers around him. Tyrese Proctor and Caleb Foster can both score. Tyrese in particular is a good ball in his hands, ball dominant scorer. So the ball may be going through Cooper Flagg. He may be getting a lot of assists. He may be generating a lot in the fast break. But I don't think we need to panic if he's averaging 10 points a game come January as opposed to 20.
I think, first of all, when we think about Cooper Flagg, we have to remember this. Jason, you mentioned about the fact that he had been dominating guys in the high school level and all these different the all-star game circuit that he's been a part of. he did that while also being a year in class level beneath these guys. Because remember, he reclassified to get to this point. And I think it's funny that we think about him as a defensive first player, because when we say that, a lot of people automatically think of a Derek Lively, right? Or even a Common Malawach, where we go, he's a raw project on offense, and on defense, he's the real deal. That is not Cooper Flagg. Cooper Flagg can score 25 points a game if he wants to. Cooper Flagg can score 10 points a game if he wants to. The question is going to be, how is he going to balance a college defense being thrown at him with the fact that when they look at the scouting game plan, his name is going to be the first one written on that board in the opposing locker room. How does he deal with that? But I make no mistake, I think that the offense is going to generate around him. I think he has the capability of being like a Paolo Banchero, who's going to get, Paolo Banchero is kind of that deal, right? Where he got 6, 7 rebounds in a game, maybe 5 or 6 assists in some games. And then some games he went for 30 points because that's what the team needed. And I think that Cooper Flagg is going to be along those lines more so than a Derek Lively, who's going to give you 18 blocks a game and in maybe 6 points, because he's not the focal point of getting the ball in the basket.
I'm going to disagree with both you guys. Cooper Flagg's going to be a way bigger part of the offense, in my opinion, than I think either of you guys do. The ball will be in his hands.
I mean, Paolo Banchero was who I just equated him to.
No.
He was the guy. I mean, he was the focal point of the offense.
And I think Flagg will be like Banchero on offense. The ball will be in his hands. At the Peach Jam last year, he averaged almost 6 assists per game. While I don't think he'll come close, he averaged like 4 assists per game for Montverde this past season, playing against an absolutely elite schedule and playing surrounded by other guys who are high impact recruits. I think you will see Cooper Flagg average over 3 assists per game. It is worth noting that last year, Tyrese Proctor led Duke in assists at like 3.7, I think was the number. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be surprised if Cooper Flagg is up around that number, maybe even higher than that this season. And there's a scenario where Cooper Flagg is the leading assist guy on this team. I think that's how much Duke is going to put the ball in his hands. And then the other thing is, you guys talking about 10 points per game? Come on. Let me give you an over-under number. I'll say 16 points per game. Are you over or under that on Cooper Flagg? Because I'm over it. Because
I'm way over that. I think when I was talking, I was saying that there is going to be games where he will get 10 points, but still affect the game. I'm not saying he's going to score 10 points a game. Yeah, so, I think he's going to be closer to 20 because, again, like Paolo Banchero had those games where he had 4 points and 10 rebounds and 8 assists. And he dominated the game, and you're like, wow, he dominated the game even though he had an off shooting night. But I do think that Cooper Flagg is more of a barometer in the sense that if he doesn't necessarily need to, because remember, we're talking about all these guys that we're saying is going to get 4 to 5 assists, 6 to 7 rebounds, 10 rebounds, right? Like not everybody
they can't all do it. No, yeah,
they can't all do it. There's only one basketball, so there's going to be nights for Cooper. That's where I think Scott. I agree with Scott. Is that there's going to be some nights where Cooper Flagg is going to have a stat line that's going to look like 10, 11 points. 6, 7 assists and like 6 or 7 rebounds. People are going to be like, yo, what happened to him? He did just fine, right? That's going to be the thing, is the numbers are not necessarily going to tell the story of how he impacts the game.
So let me just clarify one thing. I fully agree with you, Jason, that he is going to be the focal point of the offense. I think that has been made abundantly clear, like you said, by who Jon Scheyer is targeted in the portal. But I don't think the focal point of the offense necessarily means the guy putting the ball in the basket 9 times out of 10. I think that if we're doing an over-under game, if whatever number you give me on the assists for Cooper, I'm probably taking the over. I think when the points per game number you put out there, I would bet it's going to be an upward trajectory where it's going to be low at the beginning of the season. I think by February, March, he's going to be at that 18, 20 points per game level. But I think that this is something that's going to evolve as the team evolves. And I think especially in the early season, especially against, let's be honest, some of the more inferior opponents that are part of the cupcake portion of the schedule, Cooper Flagg's not going to need...
Ain't as many of those this year as is.
That's true. We don't know how many of those are actually going to be on the schedule.
And then after that, he's going to be stonks going high.
But yeah, I do think that, again, Cooper Flagg being the focal point of the offense doesn't necessarily mean Cooper Flagg scoring 20 points a game. And he's a very rare prospect in which that is not an inherent contradiction. And so that's what I think is going to be interesting as we go on the seasons. Evaluating him is going to be very different than just evaluating his raw numbers, his raw points that he's putting up on the board.
Okay, so let's wrap up the Cooper Flagg conversation. I'm going to ask you guys, I need a yes or no on both of these. First of all, RJ Davis is the reigning ACC Player of the Year. RJ Davis is returning to the ACC, an incredibly rare thing. Is Cooper Flagg ACC Player of the Year this coming season? Donald?
I don't think he's preseason Player of the Year, but he has the capability of being the ACC Player of the Year at the end.
Yeah. Scott, what do you think?
Going with my theme here, I think he won't be, just because of the pure numbers, even though he probably will be. He might be the most valuable player in the ACC, but that might not get you to Player of the Year, as that award is traditionally given out.
And with the hype that is around him, sometimes that eats into your votes, as we've seen in years past.
I will disagree with both of you. I think that at the end of the season, after Duke has won the ACC by 2 or 3 games, the ACC Player of the Year will be a Duke player, and it will be Cooper Flagg. And my bet is his stats are so eye-popping in terms of having stuff across the board. Like, when was the last time the ACC had someone average 2+ blocks and steals, 4+ assists, 8+ rebounds, and 15+ points? It's probably like almost never been done. I think those are the kind of numbers that we're going to see from him. Look, I'm higher on him than maybe anyone on the planet other than his mom. But I think he will be ACC Player of the Year. In fact, I think he will be National Player of the Year. But
honestly is funny. That's where I'm higher on him being National Player of the Year, because National Player of the Year is something where everyone comes in and they're like, yo, everyone knows that he's the guy. I actually would go so far as to say that he could possibly be the preseason National Player of the Year. And
when is the last time
hype throughout the whole thing? Right.
When's the last time a National Player of the Year didn't win their Conference Player of the Year, though? When's the last time that's ever happened?
Here's the funny thing. If there's a group that's done it, it's the ACC voters, because they're super weird. And we've seen that in years past. We're like, oh, this, like, again, like a RJ Davis wins, and you're like, and UNC gets all these votes for comeback Player of the Year and Coach of the Year. Like, they aren't supposed to go be in the top 5 every single year. Whereas Duke could run the table and they're like, oh, that's cute. That's nice. Nobody gets any award. So it's very simple. It's very easy. It's easy for me to believe that he could be National Player of the Year, both preseason and at the end, than it is for me to think that he will run the table in the ACC as well, especially considering that RJ Davis is coming back, and we know how much the writers in the ACC love RJ Davis.
All right, guys, let's move on. Next super freshman, next generational prospect, the guy who most people project to be like top 2, top 3, top 4 or so in the NBA draft, just after Cooper Flagg, Khaman Maluach. I want to start by mentioning this. When we recorded a week ago, we weren't talking about the bigs, but I said it impacted our conversation about the other guys. And I said that I thought Khaman Maluach would come along slowly, because I expected him not to arrive on campus until mid-August, after the Olympics were done, because he's playing for the South Sudan team. I was wrong. I have since been corrected. Sources close to the team have told me that he is there right now. He is on campus at this moment. He will be spending a few weeks at Duke, doing the K Academy and then hanging out with his teammates and beginning to work out with them before he goes off to work with the South Sudan Olympic team. And, he will then be off for, like a month and a half or so, probably like all of July and most of August. By the way, it is worth noting that when he is off working with South Sudan on the Olympics, he'll be battling guys like Joel Embiid and Nikola Jokic, because South Sudan is in the same bracket as the U.S. and Serbia. And even if it's just going up in practice against the other centers on that South Sudan team, I mean, it's guys like Thon Maker and Bol Bol, guys who have NBA. Bol Bol is still in the NBA. Guys who have NBA experience. He is going to come to college, and he's going to be like, oh, these college big men, they are small and they are easy. But I wanted to have that as my beginning commentary on him, because I have somewhat changed my mind about what I think of his role. As initially I thought this is a guy who's going to come off the bench early on and sort of gradually get into it. I'm starting to think that I may be wrong and that he may be there like literally from day one. Scott, give me your Malawach take.
So I am with your evolved take. I think he's too good of a player to not start from the get-go. I think that the comparisons to Derek Lively are easy to make as a recent, very touted big who came along slowly. But I don't think those comparisons are the same, because we forget that Derek Lively was coming off of a summer injury. The fact that he wasn't ready to go to the beginning of the season wasn't because he wasn't playing with the team. It was more that, he hadn't been playing for a while to begin with. I think the more relevant comparison to make is to Tyrese Proctor 2 years ago, when Tyrese was played with the Australian national team in the FIBA Asia Cup. That's why he missed most of summer practice. And even though he did have some growing pains, he was still in the starting lineup from day one. I think that there's a big difference between playing basketball elsewhere and not playing basketball at all due to injury over the summer. So I think Khaman Malawach is going to come in and he's going to start from day one. I think that he's the type of guy who, maybe he's a 20 to 25 minute per game guy as opposed to a 25 to 35 minute per game guy, at least the beginning of the year. As part of that, as he gets used to the college game, that's also something that's more common for big men, outside of Duke in the realm of college basketball to begin with. I do think, though, that the way that he complements Cooper Flagg is something that is going to be hard to keep off the floor. You put the two of them on the floor together, you put them on the floor with Malik Brown, which is something I think is actually going to happen a lot. That defense, is just scary. I still maintain that I would pay Jim Boeheim whatever he asks to come in for 1 day in the summer, do a 1 day intensive 2-3 zone course so that Duke can pull that out just for 2 plays a game, 2 out of timeouts, just with that insane length, and stymie the opposing offense into confusion for 1 key play. But that's a whole nother conversation. I think what we're going to see with the way Khaman complements Cooper Flagg, the way that he can space the floor, is something that is going to be hugely, hugely important. When you watch him play internationally, he is taking 3-4 threes a game and making 1 or 2 threes a game. This is not a guy who is shooting 35% from deep on low volume. He's showing he can shoot on volume at a decent clip. And that's something that is going to space the floor. And that's something that he gives us that the other bigs on the team that we're going to talk about down the line don't do quite as much. I think that's just going to be too powerful to keep off the floor, even if he does need to be brought along a little bit.
First of all, I'm going to start on defense. And Sam Klein, I know you're listening out there. This is what I would like as a category for the stats game: number of Khaman Malawach blocks that ends up in the upstairs portion of Cameron, because that number is not going to be 0. It is going to be at least 1 or 2 that end up in the upstairs amongst the Iron Dukes that like to sit up there. That is,
how are you going to track that stat?
Trust me, you will be able to track something like that. Those will all end up on SportsCenter, unless he just does it at a clip where they, Zion dunks, they just stop counting. At that point, we'll know that I have won that game, because I'll probably be high on that.
I'd like to point out that I spent a good bit of time watching Victor Wembanyama this year. Mm-hmm. And one of the things Wemby does that is so impressive is when he blocks the ball, he doesn't swat it.
He grabs it.
He just grabs it. Yeah.
Well, no, but he tips it up to himself. He doesn't like hitting it out of bounds. He prefers keeping it inbounds and having it start a fast break.
You were absolutely right with Victor Wembanyama, but Malawach loves sending balls into the 17th row in the basketball after league, and I've seen that too. So
there is an intimidation factor there that matters.
You just wants to let them know, don't ever come up in here again. That's what he's going to be. I think there's going to be a point where he on defense develops a mean streak in the sense that, again, he kind of sacrifices somebody's shot in the early part of a game just to show that he is not to be played with. And I think when it comes to his defense, you guys have mentioned the length, you've mentioned his height, you've mentioned his ability to his elite rim protection. And I think one thing that's kind of weird to be underrated considering he's 7'1", 250 is his rebounding. He is in the right position a lot to get rebounds. And I think in the college game, that's only going to get better because he's bigger than just about everybody else. There's not a lot of 7'1", 250 guys out there who are playing in college that we are going to run up against. So I think when it comes to his defense, again, that's going to be what keeps him on the floor quite a bit. On offense, you guys mentioned a couple of things. And I think one thing that's interesting is his 3-point shooting because, yeah, he's going to be, when we say he's a raw talent on offense, he just doesn't have a lot of super developed moves. He's not going to have a dream shake like Hakeem Olajuwon entering college, but that's something that, again, can be taught, can be learned, can be developed. And I expect that to happen. Maybe not initially, but at least in the long term, we're going to see him develop just like Derek Lively did close to the end of his 1 year in Durham. He kind of developed a move, and Mark Williams did the same thing, kind of had a move that he had been working on all year. And then once we got close to the end of the regular season, they started doing a little bit more of that move, whatever that move was, whether it was the lay-in flip or just like the kind of take one dribble and kind of do a jump hook. He's going to develop one of those moves that's going to make him super unstoppable in the paint when he decides to put his head down and go to the rim. It's not just going to be dunks with this guy. But on 3-pointers, I think the interesting thing is that we could have a lot of 5-ball outs, right? We could have a lot of 5-wide shelled offenses where he can start inside, pull him and his defender out to the 3-point line because, again, Scott, like you mentioned, he's not going to take just 1-3. He's going to take enough to make you have to respect the shot. And if you have to respect a 7'1" guy's 3, that opens up a lot of lane for other people to do work in. And we have a lot of guys who can drive the lane. We have a lot of guys who can take the ball and create shots with a lot of open space. And the one thing that's going to slow them down on some of those possessions is if Kaman Malawach is firmly planted in the paint. If he pulls himself out of the paint on some occasions to, again, either post up for the 3 if they don't guard him or be there as kind of a decoy, that's going to create a lot of space. And I think he's going to be indirectly responsible for a lot of points just by him being spaced out on the floor. And I think that is the interesting thing about this offense, probably the most interesting thing about this offense that I'm looking forward to seeing how they work with it this season.
All right, guys, I got another question for you. I need a number. How many 3-point field goal attempts per game? Give me an average. You think Kaman Malawach attempts? Scott, go first.
2.5.
Donald?
I think that's a good number. I'll go with 2.5.
I think it's be more like 1.5. And I'll tell you why. I'm not entirely convinced that he's going to venture outside a lot. He did it in the Basketball Africa League. He took an average of 3-point field goal attempts per game. And we've seen him hit them. We know he's capable, but he only hit 22% of his threes in the BAL. Now, it was just 6 games. You know, it was against elite. It was against the best competition in Africa. But, you know, it wasn't like a high volume in terms of the number of games to get a good sense of things. But like I looked last season, Mark Mitchell took 43s on the season. You know, that was like 1.1, 1.2, something like that. I suspect Kaman Malawach will be in that kind of vicinity, maybe a little bit higher than that. I don't think he will get anywhere close. Kyle Filipowski last year took 112 3-pointers. That's was right around 3.5 or so per game. I don't think Malawach will be anywhere close to a number like that. I just think there are better options for Duke than to have our 7'1", 7'2". Donald, I think he's 7'2" now. Our 7'1", 7'2".
They say he's still growing.
Yeah. 250-pound center out at the 3-point line. I think that, and Shire, I think, has sort of shown that he, you know, there's some guys that he wants shooting threes a lot, but if you're not someone that he really wants you shooting a lot of threes, I mean, look, we saw Ryan Young taking threes in practice a lot last summer. I don't think he took one all year, or maybe he took one. Derek Lively came to Duke with a reputation as a guy who could take 3-pointers. You know, he did not take very many 3-pointers at all at Duke. And I think Kaman Malawach may be more of the same. If you gave me an over-under of 1.3 or so, I'd probably take the under.
I mean, keep in mind, right? Like in a given game, we're talking about 60 to 70 possessions, right? 60 to 70 shots if you're doing good and not turning the ball over. I don't think it's out of the question. Yeah, I don't think it's going to be every play he's going to be out there, but I think there's going to be occasions where they kind of slide him out, especially again, if he's shot a 3, made a 3, whatever. I'm not saying he's going to hit 23s in a 3-week span, but he's going to go out there enough to at least make it where they have to respect him by coming out there. To do that, he has to take a couple and make them. That's the only key here. It just like Brian Young, right? He took a couple at the beginning of the season, didn't go so well for him, so he abandoned that plan. He stayed more in the paint, only other than to be the guy to kind of do the handoff when they're doing the shell offense on the top of the key.
Just really quickly, Jason, you've convinced me. I think my mathematician brain was way off. 2.5 is a lot. That's a high number. I'm a mathematician. I should know better. I'm below that. You've convinced me. But really quickly, a lot of the narrative around Kaman is about he's only been playing for 5-6 years. He's going to take some time to develop. I feel like that's doing him a disservice. I feel like that there have been so many recent stories of players, particularly internationally, who come in and outperform that storyline. I also think that for bigs, that can be actually a good thing rather than a bad thing. If Kaman Malawach was playing basketball since he was 6 years old, whoever his basketball coach was when he was 6 and 7 would have just stuck him in the paint and said, you stand there and get rebounds. The fact that he started to learn the game when he was older, when he was developed, meant that he could work with someone and say, hey, the modern game says you have to shoot threes even though you're 7-1. We're going to get you having a 3-point shot. You're not going to have, any sort of really bad, instincts or patterns or forms that you've built up from when you were a kid. I think that this might be a very weird, outlier scenario where him starting basketball later in life may be more of a blessing than a curse.
Is different though in the international game, and we've seen that in the change of the NBA because the international game has been doing that for a very long time, which is why you see guys like Luka Doncic, who's 6'7" and is a point guard. You have Nikola Jokic and Joel Embiid. Joel Embiid, remember, one of the guys that he said he looked up to because his trajectory is the same. Joel Embiid started playing basketball when he was 14 years old. I think he stopped playing soccer at 13 when he was 7 foot tall, and they're like, yo, you can't do this anymore. Pick up a basketball and dunk it. And he learned from a lot of the guys that were already in the game because at that point it was a 3-point shooting. It's a 3-point shooting game, right? So this is where he's at. And I think, I think it's a blessing and a curse because he may be raw, but that rawness can be developed very, very quickly because he is a sponge. And every day he keeps getting a little bit better.
Unless we forget, the coach who worked with Kaman at the NBA Academy also coached Joel Embiid, and is on the record of saying that he thinks Kaman is better at this age than Joel was at this age. So again, if we have and Joel Embiid,
wasn't terrible in college, but he wasn't great, right? He wasn't like an otherworldly talent in college. It was when he got to the NBA and it finally clicked.
Yeah, but he was still good enough to beat I think it was the number 3 overall pick. He still was very impactful for the Kansas team, right? I think we would all take freshman year Joel Embiid in a heartbeat. And that does not seem to be outside of the realm of possibility by any means.
So Joel Embiid as a freshman was 11 points per game, 8 rebounds per game. I got to find his block shots, 2.6 blocks per game. Guys, let me add this one dose of caution on Kaman Malawach. Chemistry and feel are a really big deal. And even though we're saying, yes, he's going to be on campus now for the next few weeks, he is going to miss a pretty fair bit of time right before, the year really starts. And the instincts, knowing where everyone is on the floor at every moment, knowing where everyone's going, knowing where your teammates are without even having to see them, those things really matter. And it also matters that Duke is going to run a different offense and defensive scheme than Kaman Malawach runs for South Sudan when he's playing with them. I still think, even though he's going to come on faster than I expected, I still think on day one, Kaman Malawach is not the starter at center for Duke. So let me put that question to each of you guys as we wrap it up. Donald, is Khaman Maluach a starter on day? I think we all agree, probably by Thanksgiving, he's a starter, if not sooner. But is he a starter on day one?
I'm going to abstain from this question.
You are such a cop-out.
on the grounds that we have not seen him in the Olympics yet, because I promise you, if he balls on the Olympics, I don't care what he's not doing on campus. He'll be just fine.
Isn't the whole point of this series is to make our predictions now and then to fix them come July? I may only be the guest, but I paid attention to the rules, sir.
And I predicted I abstained. I just predicted it. So,
Scott, what's your feeling?
I think he's starting. I think even he may not play starters minutes from day one. He may only be playing 15 minutes a game or 10 minutes a game, but I think that it makes more sense to have him in the starting lineup and to work on that because that's going to be his trajectory. Get him in that routine from the get-go, even if the minutes aren't at the starters level.
I like it. That's a smart answer, sir. All right, let's move on to Malik Brown, the guy who was brought in to play a couple different positions, I think, to play some 4, to play some 5. And, like it or not, a lot of people think that him arriving on campus is the reason Sean Stewart is no longer at Duke. We're not going to get into that, but Donald, go first for me. Tell me what your assessment is. What do you think we're going to get from Malik Brown?
This is the most interesting person, I think, of the bigs, because it's going to be hard to tell an all ACC defender, which is what he is, that he may not start and he may not get 30 minutes a game or 40 minutes, 35 minutes a game. He might get 10 minutes a game or 20 minutes a game. But having said that, I think
10's too. He's going to get more than 10 minutes a game.
That's my point, right? My point is it's very up in the air as to what he can do, considering the fact that he is an all ACC defender coming down from Syracuse. Again, a program where maybe he has, Scott, maybe he has Jim Boeheim's number that he can call him and say, yeah, please teach this to us. But he also has that in his bag too, where he has been a part of that. So maybe that's a part of things, right? But it presents a lot of options in the front court, because as we've seen, we could do him, Cooper Flagg, and Maluach. It could be, Cooper Flagg and Brown. And again, there's going to be times Cooper's not playing every second of every game. So there's going to be points where Cooper Flagg's not on the floor. You can have Maluach and Brown, Brown and Ngongbo, whoever that could be, right? But I think the interesting thing about it is, while the other guys are focused on above the rim, he's elite below the rim. He is an elite stealer, right? He's elite getting in the passing lanes, taking the ball and going the other way. And I really, when it comes to him, I think the one question that I have on offense is, will he shoot exactly 69.8% from the floor again? Because he managed to do so in both his freshman and sophomore years. That I don't think has happened in a very long time, where someone had, it's not like he, shot 69.8, 69 shots out of 100 both years. He had different shot outputs. He increases output, but still have the exact same field goal percentage. Will he have that again this year? And will his shots go down? Will he be as efficient as he can be, knowing that he may not get the ball as many times as he did at Syracuse? I think that's the real question here. But I think when it comes to offense, the reason why it's a question mark as to whether he'll start on day one, maybe alongside Maluach, maybe in place of Maluach, is because of the fact that he is polished inside the paint. He's elite at scoring at the rim. And one of the things that we have talked about is that Duke wanted to get better at finishing inside of 4 feet. He is one of those guys that was brought in to do exactly that. He is an elite guy when it comes to inside of 4 feet finishing, and again, getting rebounds and going the other way, getting steals and going the other way. He is going to affect a lot of what they do. And the great thing about him is that when he comes into the game, even if Cooper Flagg and Khaman Maluach or one or the other is not in the game, teams cannot rest, because I think having an all ACC guy defensive guy come off the bench and being able to wreak the same havoc, maybe in a different way, is going to be a very, very big boost. So it's going to be a real question of what Jon Scheyer and the coaching staff want to do with that front court and how they want to line it. If they want to go big, they'll have him in the starting lineup on day one. If they want to go, quote, small, because the only, we don't have any small guys other than Spencer Hubbard.
There is no small.
Right. But if small means starting,
medium,
point guard.
medium. They want to go medium.
Medium, yes. We want to go, medium well on the stake scale. Then maybe he sits on the bench. So I think the one thing is that his ability to be efficient on the offensive end is going to bring him on the floor. And I think the defensive shape of what we want is going to be the difference between him getting 25 to 30 minutes and him getting the 15 to 20 minutes.
We opened this podcast talking about Donald's weird injury, but then talking about the Cooper Flagg situation of is he a 3 or a 4? I think the more important question for Duke is Malik Brown a 4 or a 5? I think that the storyline around.
You don't think he's both? Wait, you don't think he's both?
That's my answer. I think that he's both. I think that the storyline around him and his entry to Duke was that he was the 5, that he was, perhaps the complementary piece to come on, because that seemed to be the role he played at Syracuse. But he only played that role at Syracuse by necessity. He entered the starting lineup when 7'4" Naheem McLeod was out for the year. So he wasn't really playing. He was playing the 5 in name only. He was really a co-4 in the Syracuse offense. I think that there's the most likely scenario is Cooper, Malik, and Kaman start. I think they play together. And I think that when Kaman needs a break, we downshift rather than bringing in his traditional backup off the bench. I think the most likely scenario is that when he needs a breather, Mason Gillis or Sion James comes in for Kaman Malwak, and Cooper moves down to the 4, and Malik Brown moves down to the 5 for those 5-10 minutes a game. I don't think that Malik Brown needs to be coming off the bench to be the quote-unquote backup 5. Because I think, like you said, Donald, he's too talented. He's too proven to be a guy who came to Duke to only play 20 minutes a game. And here's the other thing about that. If he came to Duke to only play 20 minutes a game, to sort of be a platoon with Kaman Malwak, then some of the transfer exodus that we had doesn't quite make as much sense, at least to me. And I don't have your guys' inside info. I am only a very special guest. But that said, if he was not coming in to start, there is still a role for TJ Power or Sean Stewart or both to fight over as the starting 4 or the starting 3. The fact that who knows what the chicken and the egg was, but those decisions all seem to be some way interrelated. The fact that Malik Brown is on this team and both of our, highly touted freshmen from last year aren't, implies to me that the understanding was that Malik Brown was coming in to play a starter's role, was coming in to play 30 minutes a game. Now, that's something that I think we'll learn more about as we watch this team. But if we had to, based off of the limited information we have, all the tea leaves seem to point towards the fact that the coaching staff think Malik Brown is going to play a huge role on this team.
All right, I'm going to tell you 2 things about Malik Brown that I think are going to be very interesting to you. The first one is this. I'm going to tell you right now, Malik Brown is not going to hit 72.8% of his 2-point field goals this coming season. That's what he hit last year. Again, 72.8% of his 2-point field goals. That's because he was pretty much nothing but a dunker and a finisher at the rim for Syracuse, and he was largely unguarded in those situations. If you watch the highlights of his play last year, a whole lot of it was, grabbing an offensive rebound and just putting it back. Or a whole lot of it was JJ Starling and who is the point guard for Syracuse? Mintz. Yeah, Judah Mintz, right. Those guys taking the ball in the lane, the defense comes to them, and they dumped it off to Malik Brown, and he got an easy bucket. And I don't know. I don't think he's going to be that kind of player for Duke. I think that he will have a little bit more varied of an offensive role for the Blue Devils this year. He's still going to be a low usage guy, but I don't think he's going to be just a dunker for the Blue Devils, merely because the way John Shire runs the offense and such that, I just don't see, that's not a role that really happens that much at Duke. The other thing I'm going to tell you that you may be surprised at is if you look at Malik Brown's stats over the course of the season, your eyes kind of glaze over as you get to the assist column, and you're like, oh, it's a guy who averaged like 1.2 assists in his career. I think he had like 1.7 last year. I'm going to tell you something that you may not have noticed about him. In his final 10 games for Syracuse, he averaged better than 3.3 assists per game. He had 5 games in those final 10 games where he had 4 or more assists, like 4, 5, 6 assists in one game. I want to remind you again, Tyrese Proctor led Duke in assists last year at 3.7. What we saw from Malik Brown late in the season from Syracuse was a guy who is becoming more and more involved in their offensive scheme. Now, I'm not talking about him putting the ball on the floor, creating off the dribble and stuff like that. That is not Malik Brown's game. But I am talking about him getting the ball in a good position. And when the D has to adjust to him, he finds someone who's in an even better position to finish the play. And I think you may see Duke. I'm not going to say running the offense through Malik Brown. Of course not. No way. But I'm telling you, Malik Brown may surprise you with his ability to find teammates and be a little bit of a, whether you want to call it like the hockey assist, that when Cooper Flagg or Tyrese Proctor or Caleb Foster or someone like that creates an opportunity and they feed Malik Brown, that he is then the guy who gets the assist because he feeds the next guy who has an even better shot. And then the last thing I wanted to mention about him was, as you guys have talked about, his defense is his calling card. But folks should understand it's not that he is a shot blocker. We got Cooper Flagg, we got Kamen Malawach who are going to block shots. Malik Brown is one of these guys who has great positioning with his feet, has long arms. He challenges every dribble, every pass. He gets steals, he gets deflections. And I think there is a very interesting look. We're talking about the bigs, but there's a really interesting lineup that Duke, I don't know how much Duke is going to use it, but Mason Gillis, Sion James, Malik Brown, for that matter, Tyrese Proctor, Cooper Flagg, all these guys are guys who are like super long and are great at just being disruptive on defense, not in specific stats, but just messing you up and causing your offense to not run well. And I think that's the thing. When I look at Malik Brown, that's the thing I think he's going to bring to the table for Duke. And then, by the way, one of the ways he brings that to the table is if he is playing the 5. We've talked about, is he the 4, is he the 5? There will be times he will be playing the 5. You will see something out of Duke when Malik Brown plays the 5 that is almost unprecedented in college basketball, which is that Duke will switch 1 through 5. Every single player on the floor is capable of guarding every single player on the other team. Usually it is the center. It usually is the big man that holds you back from being able to do that. Malik Brown can guard a 5. Malik Brown can guard a 1. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see the combos that Shire puts out on the floor that take advantage of that ability from Malik Brown.
Real quick about Malik Brown, I think the one thing also that is going to be underrated this year, we've talked a lot about how guys can steal the ball, how they can block the shots, all this stuff, right? But we're not going to get 50 blocks a game. We're not getting 50 steals a game. That just nobody's getting 100 possessions where we can do that. So there's going to be possessions where we need to have guys who can just defend straight up. One thing to watch about Malik Brown, he's able to do that. The one, I guess, bit of cold water I'll throw onto it is that sometimes he has to do it by fouling. He averaged 3 fouls a game last year. If there's anything that's a downside to his game, he averaged 3 personal fouls drawn a game. And that number, I want to see that obviously come down. But the way that comes down is that he's playing straight up defense because we need somebody to not go for the block, to not go for the steal. We need somebody to play straight up defense. We have a couple of those guys on the perimeter that we think are capable of doing that. We need somebody inside who's not going to be about throwing it, 17 rows into the stands. He's not about throwing it and catching it, and blocking it and catching it and going down for the floor. He's just about straight up in your face defense so that when someone gets down the paint, and yes, there's going to be a time where, they may get the shot off. It's still not going to go in because this guy just plays good defense. That's what Malik Brown can be. He doesn't have to be above the rim. He's going to play below the rim.
Guys, really quickly, we got to move on. Man, I can't believe we're going so long on these episodes. Let's get to
you
the
guys
last.
regretting bringing me on yet?
Yeah, right. Exactly. I don't need a third player. Get out of here, Scott. No, I'm kidding. You're awesome. All right. The last of the rotation, at least what we think will be the last of the rotation bigs, is Patrick Ngongba. I am most torn about his role as anybody on the team, although I think I think I'm most torn because I am trying to figure out where he gets a role. I think probably Patrick Ngongba is not playing in truly competitive games, but he could surprise a little bit. Unlike some of the other big men who've come to Duke in recent years, he's got a grown man kind of body. 6'11", like 235, 240. Now, look, he's got some fat on him right now because he had foot surgery and basically didn't run for like 9 months or so. So he's got to get back in shape a little bit, but that's probably going to be a process of getting fat off and getting muscle on, because Duke, believe me, will make sure that is what his summer is all about. And the thing I wanted to note about Patrick is his game reminds me a little bit of Cooper Flagg's teammate at Montverde, Derek Queen, who was as impressive as anybody other than maybe Cooper Flagg on the All-Star circuit over the past month or so. Now, he's a kid who's going to Maryland, but he and Cooper played together and played really well together at Montverde and in these All-Star games. Cooper's clearly used to that kind of player, a larger guy, maybe not as quick, but who really, gets in the way in terms of setting screens and just being disruptive, and who finishes really well around the basket. And I wonder if maybe Cooper will look at Patrick Ngongba and say, you know what, I recognize this kind of guy. This is someone similar to what I'm used to down here in the post. And if that may perhaps help Patrick get a little tiny bit more of a role than he would otherwise have. Donald.
I think when it comes to Patrick Ngongba and Jason, as both you and Scott know, I've seen a lot of Patrick Ngongba just on TV, but also just living up here in the DC area where he's come from, right? He's part of the PVI pipeline that we've developed here. And I think one thing that's going to be interesting is how they bring him along, but also his game is based on physicality. He is a guy that's very physical. He can go up and get rebounds. He can outmuscle guys. As you mentioned, Jason, he has an NBA ready body, but because of the fact that he has been out for the better part of a year due to that foot injury, he's going to have the hardest time to get back to being on the court, because he has to go beyond just, losing some baby fat, right? He has to go beyond that, because in this part of his game, it requires him to be at the top of his game. And that doesn't happen with a summer's worth of conditioning. It happens also with his timing, his awareness, all that needs to come back. And also just the sheer fact that he has to be even more physical than he has been in high school to be able to bang with college bigs. Now, I think that's something that he might be ready for that. He's going to be a guy that I'm looking to see develop that during the season, and maybe be a guy that, kind of like a Mark Williams, who doesn't quite get it all together, but as we approach the end of the season, he starts to put it together in the form of the physicality, in the form of being on the floor and not being lost. But also, I think for Patrick Ngongba, he's going to be a guy that when he's on the floor, he can pass the ball. He can pass the ball around to different guys. He's a guy that he gets the ball in the post. He's not going to be a black hole. He's going to be able to find guys on the court. And that's where it's going to take the most time for him to really gel, because he's not going to be, especially, on the conditioning side, it's going to take a while for him to get back to that point. But also just that timing, that sharpness, that awareness, it sometimes takes a little bit of time for him. So I'm looking for him to be a guy that early in the season can play if there's a lot of foul trouble amongst the bigs, which obviously can happen. It's college basketball that these guys are not going to go through life not getting, any fouls. So there's going to be times where some of these guys that we've talked about have to go to the bench. Patrick Ngongba can come in for them. But also, I think as we get towards the end of the year, that's when I look for him to start kind of putting all this stuff together, the sharpness, the timing, where he needs to be on the floor. I'm not saying he's going to be look like he's going to be on skates out there in the first part of the season, but he's going to be one that might be slowest to come along, only because of the fact that he needs to get all that back to be the Patrick Ngongba that we recruited.
I'll finish up on him quick. I think there's two important things. One, I was ready to write off Patrick Ngongba for this season until I watched the Chipotle Nationals finals. He only played, I think, 8 or so minutes in that game, but he was one of the most impactful players on the floor against Cooper Flagg's Montverde in that game.
Against Derek Queen. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was, I think, he'd only played 2 or 3 games, before that for over the last year or so. That really impressed me. The other thing about him is the fact that, and Donald, you alluded to this, it can sometimes be easier for a big to get on the floor, even if it is for 2-3 minutes, if it's foul trouble or if it's conditioning. Lest we forget, Christian Reeves played 12 minutes in the opener against Dartmouth last year. He played 2 key minutes due to foul trouble in the next game against Arizona. And we all thought Christian Reeves he's in the rotation. Him and Ryan Young might be splitting these backup minutes, right? So it's not outside the realm of possibility that Patrick Ngongba's role is to come in and play 2-3 minutes if someone needs a breather or if someone's in foul trouble. And that happens more often for bigs than it does for guards. And when and if that does happen, what a luxury it is to have a top 20 recruit as your backup big to play those emergency minutes. I think it's going to be emergency minutes for him, but that's different than for a deep bench guard. I think Pat Ngongba is going to play more minutes this year than Darren Harris because of the fact that you need that third big off the bench more often than you need that third or fourth guard.
All right, guys, we're going to wrap this up with this. What's your over? So I'm going to give you the number in competitive games. 4 minutes per game. You over or under that for Patrick Ngongba on the season? Scott?
I'm under that. I think he will play, but I think it'll be a minute or two a game.
Donald?
First of all, Sam, take all these out of the stats game.
Sorry.
I'm tended to go under, only because again, I think he's going to be the one that takes the most time to really get everything sharp where he's one on the court.
Yeah, I'm also under. In fact, I think that probably in really competitive games, we won't see Patrick Ngongba at least.
Now, here's the question. Define competitive, because the hope is that a lot of these games aren't in the second half where he will get some playing time.
Yeah, I'd love to hear. He doesn't play in competitive games, but he averages 8 or 10 minutes a game over
because there's nothing competitive about these games.
That'd be perfectly fine with me. I could live with that for sure. All right, we're going to take a quick break. On the other side, there are a couple more big men on the Duke roster. Some names that we weren't entirely sure would be here will be back, and we will talk about them after a break.
Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you could have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that. One insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company. Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you could have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that. One insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company. Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you could have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that. One insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company. Hey Hawk fans, even if it's been years since you graduated, the Hawkeyes are your team for life. Well, you could have a Farm Bureau agent for life, and auto, and home and business insurance. Imagine that. One insurance agent for everything. It's that simple. Former Hawkeye and All-American Mitch King can be your Farm Bureau agent for life. Call Mitch at 319-653-5428. Tell him the walk-on sent you. That's 319-653-5428. It's your future. Let's protect it. Farm Bureau Life Insurance Company, Farm Bureau Property and Casualty Insurance Company.
Back from the break, and Donald, I know you really wanted to do this. We have gotten word of the entire Duke roster, and it includes some walk-ons, some big men that we we weren't sure will be back in uniform. Tell me a little bit about who is going to be filling out, I guess, positions 13, 14, and 15 on the Duke roster.
Yeah, and there's one guard. We talked about Cameron Sheffield on the last episode when he committed, and he's kind of probably number 12.
Number 12. Yeah.
He's number 12. But number 13, 14, 15 are three guys that were on the team last year. And if there's anything that we love as guys who are coming back, guys who are, in the case of at least two of them have already gotten their degrees. And in the case of one, will get his degree next year. That's Stanley Borden, Neil Begovic, and Stanley Hubbard. Yeah. And so I think Spencer Hubbard. Stanley Borden, Neil Begovic, and Spencer Hubbard. I shouldn't put the S's next to each other because it trips me up. But when it comes to Hubbard, first of all, the only detriment to him is that he will be 10 inches shorter than the second shortest guy on the team. That is unfortunate. And our record for height on the team has gone down a couple of inches by him being on the floor. But make no mistake, I think we'll see him in the late garbage times. He'll be one of the last guys off. Let's talk about the two guys that are the bigs, Neil Begovic and Stanley Borden. Neil Begovic, we actually saw not necessarily in a lot of competitive minutes, but as we mentioned, the garbage time, we saw Neil Begovic get on the floor in those last minute or two of some of these ball games. And I think that we will see that again this year, hopefully, in a lot of these games, because as we mentioned before the break, we hope a lot of these games are not competitive in the sense that they're over by the under 12 timeout and we can not have to worry about dividing up all these minutes. But I do think Neil Begovic has a role to play both, again, in practice, but also in these games. He will be a guy that can come in late in the game, not necessarily need to provide offense. We've seen him shoot a couple of threes. We've seen him be inside and get a couple of rebounds, but we're not expecting to do anything beyond that. Now, the one thing that I would love to see is Stanley Borden get some playing time this year, because this man has earned it. He has been a model citizen. He's been a model student. He's been a model athlete. He's been a guy. Again, we talk about guys sticking around, and a lot of people were really, concerned that a lot of guys decided to, exit Duke after this season. This man is here. He's going to be a senior and is a 7-footer. Again, they don't grow on trees, so having a 7-footer in practice is going to be a very, very big deal, even on a big team such as Duke. But I do hope that that Stanley Borden gets in and gets some playing time this year, because he's played, so well in practice, and by all accounts, he is the consummate teammate, one of the best teammates around, and just, again, a model citizen, and all the stuff, the humanitarian stuff, Jason, that we've talked about on the show that he's done. I hope for that alone that he maybe gets that last scholarship that's hanging out there. There's one open scholarship, and I don't know who's going to claim that. But at the end of the day, I also think that Stanley Borden has earned his right to be a Duke basketball player on the floor, and I hope we see that in a few games this year.
I'll say this. You can, like you said, you can never have too many 7-footers. Stanley Borden could have down transferred to a very low mid-major, probably gotten some playing time. Because again, if you're 7 foot, throw him on the basketball court, see what happens. Good for him for sticking it out at Duke. Good for us, because every time we're going up against practice against a 7-footer, we don't have to simulate that opponent, that opponent's big by making someone bigger, which you obviously cannot do, right? That is someone that, of all the practice players, and we talked about that, you talked about that with Sheffield's transfer, Stanley Borden's probably the most important practice player to have, because you cannot teach 7 foot tall, no matter how hard you try. So it's awesome to see. If I recall correctly, Spencer Hubbard did have a scholarship last year. I think they put out one of those videos where they gave the walk-on the scholarship. It'd be sort of crappy to give him the scholarship one year and take it away the next. I'm not sure how that works. In the NIL world, maybe it's just all symbolic. Because obviously if he has it, then that's a 13 scholarship, and there isn't one for Stanley Borden. I don't think that's consequential at all in this modern world that we live in, but I believe that was the case last year.
I think that the scholarship will go to Spencer Hubbard. I don't remember exactly what Stanley Borden's family does, but I believe that they are fairly well off, and that paying for Duke is not a hardship for them. I could be wrong about that, but
NIL, as you mentioned, NIL changes all that, so it's not as it shouldn't be as big as of an issue. I think obviously one of the areas of focus would be in terms of making sure everybody's covered, even Neil Begovic and Stanley Borden, and making sure they have enough NIL dollars to offset that. So I'm not too concerned about it. It's more, as Scott mentioned, a more symbolic thing as we got last year with the nice little video about Spencer Hubbard, who again also deserves it.
And speaking of NIL, let's very, very quickly on this. This is a pretty significant development. It has been reported that the ACC and the Big 12 have become the first conferences to have their presidents vote. The ACC presidents got together in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they voted to accept the settlement that has been proposed in the House versus NCAA lawsuit. This is the multi-billion-dollar lawsuit that seeks to recoup old NIL dollars that players should have gotten. I think it's like players who played from like 2016 to 2022, I believe, are the years. There's a separate lawsuit about players who played before 2016. All these things. The NCAA is clearly ready to shell out billions of dollars to make up for the fact that for years they said student athlete, they don't get paid, when everyone with two eyes and ears could tell that the players were being taken advantage of. As part of this settlement, and this is the significant part that I want to talk about very briefly, as part of this settlement, the schools are agreeing that they will enter into contracts with the players to play the players somewhere around $20 to $22 million a year. Now, it's worth noting that is across all sports, across your entire athletic program. If you want to have the world's greatest swimming program, you can pay your swimmers millions of dollars. But at a place like Duke, that money's going to be going to basketball players, football players, probably some women's basketball players. You know, I don't know that Duke's going to allocate some money perhaps to other sports as well, but $20 million goes away really quickly if you're allocating it across a bunch of different sports. But this is the probably single biggest change, other than the transfer portal, that we have seen to college basketball rules. This is the beginning of paying the players by the schools, not paying them via NIL. Donald, take it. You're the lawyer. You've studied this more than any of us. Take it away.
Yeah. So I think the first thing to recognize is that nothing has been formalized. Nothing has been finalized. You mentioned that the ACC and the Big 12 have voted. The other big Power 5 schools, and yes, that includes the Pac-12, because the Pac-12 still exists for another month. They still need to vote on this, and also the NCAA Board of Governors needs to vote on it. Everyone assumes.
Well, I think what they said was that the Pac-12 is included because when the lawsuit was filed, the Pac-12 existed, and so that's why they're sort of. I don't know.
No, what are
those? It's retroactive to when the Pac-12 existed.
Yeah.
Well, no. What I'm saying is, we know that we joke and clown about how that's going away, but it has not gone away yet. And so as long as they are breathing, they are still voting, right? The Big 12 voted unanimously, but two teams actually abstained. That's Texas and Oklahoma, who are still a part of the Big 12 until they move to the SEC next month. So as this happens, they still need to vote as the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 needs to sign off on this before it can go through, along with the Big 10 and the SEC. Now, questions about whether the Big 10 and the SEC are going to be as, quick to do this, because this is the issue with this fund. The fund is estimated to be at $2.7 billion. That's what the framework is that they're attempting to establish. And as you mentioned, Jason, it'll be around $20 to $25 million a year for every school that opts into this. But this needs to be more structured than that, because the arms race has begun, and it has begun in a big way. FedEx has agreed to a deal with Memphis to pump $25 million in NIL money into the athletics program over the next 5 years. Arkansas has Walmart and Tyson's Food in their corner now that Calipari is there. As I mentioned, Memphis, FedEx, Miami had LifeWallet. You're going to see across the country deals between schools and companies to subsidize, or at least supplement, this $20 million, because as you mentioned, Jason, there's just too many hands for $20 million to really mean something. And there's going to be sponsorships, right? Like you could have the Wine family head soccer coach at Duke University, right? We already have that in some universities. I'm not saying that I have any kind of money for the soccer coach, but what I'm saying is you're going to see stuff like that brought to you by Carl's Jr. We're close to that. We're close to this part of idiocracy. Now, here's the other thing that I think is going to be really, really interesting to watch. Just this morning, there was an article about a former FSU quarterback, Drew Weatherford, and he has a private equity firm who has approached 50 schools about trying to start a college NIL fund that can be anywhere between $50 and $200 million per school. Because at this moment, $50 million a year for a school is still too many hands for that, right? There's still not enough to go around because, as you mentioned, Jason, you mentioned the big ones. Everyone's focusing on football and men's basketball and even to an extent women's basketball, but we have a really good golf team. Like there's some places like Nebraska has a really good volleyball team. They are going to command a lot of these dollars. Duke lacrosse, right? They're going to command a lot of these dollars. And they're not going to be satisfied with, oh, well, you're lacrosse, so you're only going to get 50,000 because someone's going to offer more, because that's where this arms race is going. And that's where the NCAA really needs to take this framework and really structure it ASAP. Because at this point, the next step is for Duke to call Tim Cook up at Apple and be like, yo, Apple, let's make a deal and get this money, because that is where this is going. And we can't wait for it to get to the point where we have to be sponsored by Apple and Google and the Carlyle Group. We have to have this structured now. And the problem with the NCAA is they're just trying to get rid of the lawsuit first before they establish a framework. And they're not focusing on what's 5 years down the road, which is the exact reason we're in this position.
So 2 quick things here. One, University of Michigan is already in that weird place where every coaching job is sponsored. And every time they introduced a head coach, it is the blah, blah, blah family men's head basketball coach. It is weird and it is annoying, and no one should do that. That is one of the few bad things I will say about the University of Michigan, my second alma mater. The more important thing on this point, we all know at this point, after a couple years of NIL, that the big names are going to get their money. It's all been hush hush, and we don't know how much it's been for a little while, but we know that that's happening. We have a pretty good understanding that that's happening at Duke. What I hope, and I don't have a lot of faith that this will actually happen, but in an ideal world where the NCAA becomes a competent organization, which again is a pipe dream, I hope that some of this gets organized to make sure that the lower tier schools, that the other sports, that the bench players are getting their share of the revenue. I've been of the belief for a long time that every person who is playing collegiate sports is contributing something to the professional sports landscape in America. If you play at Eastern Michigan University and you play a game against Michigan and 15 of those guys go on to the NFL draft, your efforts have indirectly gone to training those players and making them better suited and better ready to play in the NFL. That has value. That has monetary value that we have overlooked for a long, long time, and that I think is going to continue to get overlooked in the NIL landscape, where it's all about getting the big fish. You look at everywhere else in the world, Canadian junior hockey, junior soccer overseas. When you are in a developmental league, you're making money. You're not making big money, but your existence, your participation in that game helps the sport, even if only one of those guys is going to go on to play in the big time. It's the same thing in minor league baseball. If you're a single A baseball player that got undrafted, you're not making good money, but you are making money because your presence is the only thing that allows there to be games that first round draft pick can play in his first rookie league. That's something that has been missing in this conversation about NIL dollars. I hope that something comes out of this, that there's some sort of ability to collectively bargain. There's some sort of ability to say, hey, if you have a scholarship at a D1 school, you get X amount of dollars, period, end of sentence. I'm not optimistic that's going to happen, but I hope that we can at least start that element of the conversation now.
And, the like blank family head coach position is not just a Michigan specific one. I know that's something that they do across the sport. Stanford does it for every single one of their sports too. And Stanford is one of the few schools in this country that has every single scholarship endowed where they're not paying a dime. So they have this too. And they did this in response to cutting like 8 sports to salvage some of the things that they have. But I will say this, the one thing that is going to be a big crux in this whole thing over the next 5 years is the Olympic sports. Because guess what is getting more and more traction on television? It's the baseballs, the softballs, the gymnastics, the volleyballs, those sort of things, field hockey. If you go on ESPN Plus and you click on the ACC, 99% of what you can find is not basketball and it is not football. It is those other sports. And as that becomes more and more on TV, I mean, think about it. 10 years ago, the only time you could see college baseball on TV was the College World Series. That was it.
Yeah.
They maybe had the regional like finals, the super regional finals to get there, but that's it. Now you can watch the very first game. I can watch every single game of Duke's football or baseball and softball season on ESPN, ESPNU, ESPN2, or ESPN Plus. So it is something where as those get more on TV, it's a harder argument to say that all of the money is being funded by just football and maybe basketball. You have to say that these people are going to step up and going to say, hey, we are on TV just as much, if not more, than football, because I have 50 games in a year.
Women's volleyball last year set every record you could imagine viewership.
Every single one. Yeah.
The national championship game drew more than 1 million viewers on ESPN. Fox started broadcasting games on Saturday nights, not Fox Sports 1, not, Fox.
Big Fox.
Broadcast Fox was broadcasting big games and getting 2-3 million viewers. So again, if we're going to do revenue sharing, if that's what this is, then the revenue sharing has to go to everyone that contributes to that revenue. And like you said, those Olympic athletes contribute a heck of a lot to that revenue. They also contribute a heck of a lot to all the athletes who are going to be on our TVs all summer and making a bunch of their own money in endorsement deals. None of those people exist if they didn't train in the American college sports ecosystem, which doesn't exist were it not for all the other scholarship players who aren't going to make it to the Olympics, but are still pretty darn good and putting in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into their athletic endeavors.
The times they are a-changin'. All right, guys, we could continue talking about this for a while, but we have been talking for way too long already. We are wrapping up this episode of the Duke Basketball Roundup. I'm Jason. He's Donald. He is special guest Scott. And this is the Duke Band to play us out and take us home.